So, child has visual needs according to age. According to age, the child has very limited view of his surrounding. So they don't need a distant vision, a sharp, focused, distant vision. So you can probably avoid giving them any distant correction. Then there is a role of e-prescribe. You are probably hampering a process of the e-metropisation, and if you don't prescribe, you are putting the child to the risk of amblyopia. So it's indeed a double-edged sword with a thin line. And then of course there are associated conditions which we take into account before we want to prescribe any kind of glasses to a child. And then we cannot express what they want, what is their need. So one has to be very careful when prescribing. The working sisters have already told that most preverbal children is very different from that of adults. Generally, child has a very minimal or no need of a sharp, focused distance accuracy, and especially if it is a 3-year-old. So children, preschool children, generally have a working area of around 1 to 2 meters. So even if they are not corrected very focusedly for distance, it doesn't matter to them. And thus, in contrast, the older children and adults who need more focused vision, you have to prescribe full glasses. So, before we know what we have to prescribe, we should understand the anatomy and physiology development that is going on within a child's system, and so that we know that how e-metropisation is achieved. The most crucial period for development of a visual system is from birth to 3 years of age, although changes do continue till 7 to 10 years of age. Visual maturity is usually achieved by 10 years of age. So a newborn child is mainly hyperopic child has a axis of around 17 to 75 millimeter, a corneal diameter of around 9 to 10.5, a lens which is highly myopic around 90 diopter, and a retina which is immature. So therefore the vision in this child may not be as normal as an adult. As the child grows, the development takes place and there is increase in axial length. Normally, and there is an average increase in axial length by 2.5 to 3 millimeter in first year of life, which is very fast. Later on, the rate of increase slows down, and there is approximately 1 millimeter of change in another 10 years. So by age of 5 years or so, the child reaches the level of an adult axial length. Coming to cornea, at birth, the corneal diameter is small. So at around 3 years, which gradually increases, and at around 3 years, it reaches up to the age of 11 to 11.5 millimeter. Similarly, the radius of curvature is also small in a child, and it increases around 7.5 at the age of 7 millimeter. So as there is increase in corneal diameter, there is increase in radius of curvature that causes flattening of cornea and decrease in dioptric power or keratometry of cornea. So at around 1 year, or maybe a neonate has around 46 to 48 diopter of corneal power, but at 7 years of age, it reaches out to adult level, which is around 44 diopters. Both axial length is increasing, the cornea is losing its power, but most of the power, the change in the refractive error is brought about by the lens. Lens, which was around 90 diopter at birth, reaches up to 75 diopter at 1 year. Zadnik and their associate propose that it's an equatorial growth because of change in axial length, increase in axial length, the equator expands, and that causes stretching of lens. This stretching in turn causes flattening, which reduces the power of the lens. So that's how the lens power is reduced. Coming to retina, an adult mature retina is a monolayer structure mainly made up of cone, but it's not so true for a child, for a neonate. They have multiple cells there at fovea also. They have multiple layers present there at fovea along with photoreceptor. So the maturation starts with the outward displacement of the cells of inner nuclear layer and ganglion cell layer, while the photoreceptor, mainly the cone cells, they migrate towards the center. So as a result, the other cell layers are migrating out, and the photoreceptor cells, especially the cones, are migrating in. That causes a dip. It causes a dip in the fovea, leading to its maturation. So this process of migration is not completed until 11 to 15 months of age, so around 1.5 years. So this is the reason probably that they have poor vision at that time. But there is also not just migration of the cone, but there is increase in density of the cone, which became thin and longer and thus pushed the rod more towards more periphery. The cone outer segments develop slowly, and this process takes up 45 months post-term. So the entire process of foveal maturation is completed till 4 years of age. At the time when there is an eye development going on, there is a neurological development also going on to connect the eye to the visual cortex. So there is development of visual pathway at initial 6 months of the life. Then there is increase in neural cells in visual cortex and development of visual cortex, which is continued till 2 years of age. So for till 2 years of age, the child may not have a perfect visual system, may not have a perfect visual cortex, which may still be immature. The lateral geniculate body, although matures till 6 to 12 months of age, but minor changes, minor alteration do continue till 2 years of age. Demyelination of optic nerve is completed by 2 years. So when all this process is going on, the refractive state of the child's eye is also changing. So how does it change? What are the refractive error trends? So as we all know that the refractive error is basically a difference between the focal length, which is determined by corneal length, and the axial length of any eye. Generally, it is seen that most of the children are hypermetropic. The newborns are hypermetropic. This was an Indian study done from Bombay. So they have shown that around 60% of children are kind of hypermetropic, and if you combine the astigmatism, it becomes around 76%. The myopia is hardly 6 plus 6, 12%, and yes, some of them will still be around 12% will still be emetropic. So at birth, the eye is approximately 3-diopter hypermetropic, and this increases till 7 years of age and then starts declining. Then myopia takes predominance over hyperopia. Woods et al. Have studied the longitudinal change in the development of refractive error in infants. So they have studied that around 2 to 12 weeks, the low myopic errors tend to go towards hyperopia, and the child who was already hyperopic becomes more hyperopic. So there is basically a hyperopic change for first 12 weeks. Then the myopic changes starts taking place. And although this myopic change is there, but it's very non-significant, so child still remains hyperopic. At around 26 to 36 weeks, around 60% of infants show myopic shift, and around 24% of infants show hypermetropic shift. And this is also coupled with the decrease in spread of differences of spherical equivalent. That means that the range of spherical errors, the range of myopia and hyperopia decreases, and child tends to shift towards emetropia. So at around 52 weeks, say around 1 year, the shift is the net result of large decrease in hypermetropia for infants. So how does a hyperopia change? So a hyperopic child who is born with less than 2.5 diopter of hyperopia, there is a trend that he will eventually become emetropic. But if hyperopia is more than 2.5, there are likely chances that he will retain this hyperopia by around 3.5 years of age. So in general, the rate of decrease of hyperopia is around 0.06 diopters per month per diopter till around 12 to 17 months. An infant tends to lose almost 1/3 of their spherical equivalent of emetropia and around 2/3 of their astigmatism during the first 2 years of life. So what are the refractive error trend changes in astigmatism? So at birth, the average astigmatism is around 3 diopter. It decreases to 1 diopter, say around 2.5 to 5 years of age. It has been seen, or it has been studied, that with the rule astigmatism, if a child is born with the rule astigmatism, there are higher chances that the child will attain emetropia. But if there is an against the rule of astigmatism, there are chances that this astigmatism may persist throughout his life. As far as anisometropia is concerned, around 11 to 22% of full-term babies are anisometropic, and around 2.5 diopter of anisometropia can be considered as normal. If there is an anisometropia which is more than 3 diopter per diopter, and if it's persistent till age of 1 year, there are chances that this child will have this anisometropia till 10 years of age. So there is a high risk of amblyopia in such cases. So if one finds that there is an anisometropia at 1 year of age, one should think of prescribing glasses, because otherwise the child may become amblyopic. Anisometropia more than 5 is probably the limit beyond which emetropization cannot take place in early childhood. As far as myopia is concerned, myopia is very low in prevalence. It's around 2% to 7 to 8 years. The rise of prevalence begins only at around teens, which is around 15 to 20%, except in premature babies who have myopia since birth, and it increases with the age. Myopia in premature babies tend to increase with age. There are other factors why myopia in preterm babies do increase. It's not the part of this discussion. So we have seen that the emetropization process occurs mainly during first 4 to 5 years of life, with both initial myopia and hypermetropia converging on low hyperopia. So by 6 years of age, around 80% of children are found to be emetropic. Now the question is, how does this emetropization occurs? Is it a passive process? Is it a passive process which is predetermined by our genetic factors, by our race, by our environment, or is it an active adaptation according to the need of the child? So it's a passive in a way because there is increasing radius of corneal curvature. So there's a corneal flattening, there's a lens flattening, there's increasing AC depth, and there is increasing exit length. So these 3-4 factors tend to balance each other or cancel out each other, making the child emetropic. So if the rate of loss of power of cornea is similar to that of rate of axial growth, there would be a complete emetropization. If the rate of loss of power by lens and cornea is less and the rate of axial growth is more, then we will have myopia, and vice versa. So emetropization therefore could result either from the loss of anterior segment power at different rates and depending on the initial refractive error. But unfortunately, the process is not that simple. It's not very passive process that we have just decreasing corneal power, decreasing lens power, and increasing axial length can cancel out each other. No, it's a very complicated process and it involves n number of factors which I'll be discussing subsequently. So there's an active emetropization. Our knowledge of active emetropization mainly comes from experimental studies. There are no human studies, unfortunately, for this particular theory or hypothesis. So it has been seen that the active mechanism of emetropization depends on the feedback from the retina type. If there is a sharp focus of retina, probably there is no further need of any change. But if the focus at retina is blurred, then there is a neural signal sent to the retina or to the cortex that there is something wrong with the focus at retina. So then the process starts. I'll discuss subsequently how it happens. So any kind of visual interference or visual deprivation due to congenital eye disorders like congenital cataract, ptosis, and other things tend to elongate the eye. So the eye tend to become myopic, and thus they tend to fall further away from emetropia. An experiment on chicks have shown that when the chicks were reared in a continuous illumination, they developed an axial myopia and astigmatism. On contrary, if they were reared in a dark area, then they developed hyperopia. And another experiment by Schaeffer et al. Have shown that if you make a chick myopic by giving positive spectacles, probably then there will be compensatory decrease in axial length, and vice versa. If you make a chick hyperopic by giving negative glasses, then there will be increase in axial length. So this has been an interesting finding in a way that a child, when it initially is myopic, somehow through the neural feedback, the axial length tends to be short, and if the child is hyperopic, the axial length tends to increase. So that's how the active emmetropization takes place. The role of accommodation in myopia is still controversial, although there have been various studies to show that probably the two things are accommodated. Near work and myopia are kind of accommodated, but there is no direct evidence to suggest the same. It has been seen that if one blocks the ciliary ganglion or there is any lesion of Edinger-Wetkes nucleus which are responsible for accommodation, there is no prevention of visual deprivation myopia. So if you kind of block the accommodation, the eye would still grow. There will be still axial elongation. So myopia would still develop. Although it has some effect on overall development of the ocular growth, but it does not have any effect on the elongation of the axial. So this proves probably accommodation may not have a very major role in development of myopia. So is there any role of higher level control? Various optic nerve sections have been done and various visual deprivation experiments were done to see this particular fact. So when the optics nerve of the eyes which were sectioned, they responded appropriately according to the refractive error. Eventually, but what happened? Eventually they overshot. So if they were initially myopic, they become hypermetropic, and if they were initially hypermetropic, they tend to become myopic. So they concluded that emmetropization is more accurate with an intact optic nerve, and therefore a feedback from brain may be an essential factor for regulating the growth mechanism. Is there a role of genetics? We don't know as yet, but yes, there are evidence, especially in myopia, when we know that if both the parents are myopic, probably there are 40% of chances that the child will eventually be myopic. If a single parent is myopic, then 22% of chances that a child will be myopic, and if none of the parents are myopic, then probably there are only 8% of chances of child being myopic. This was an interesting study which was done, which was a Barclay infant biometry study. They have done this study to correlate the three main parameters of the ocular growth with the refraction to know whether these three have any effect on the retinoscopy. This was done at 3 months and then again was repeated at 9 months. So they noted the change in parameters within this 6 months period and correlated with the change in refractive error within that 6 months period. So this is what they found out. In graph, as you can see, there was considerable emmetropization between 3 to 6 months, and graph shows that the maximum children were ranged between 1 diopter to 2.5 diopter, and the mean hypermetropia was average around 2.16. Similarly, in graph B, we can show that more number of children, this bar you can see, the more number of children from hypermetropia are now probably shifting towards emmetropia. So the average refractive error from 2.16 now decreased to 1.36. So definitely there is emmetropic change without any active intervention from a doctor's side. So an axial length of eye increased on an average of 1.2 millimeter in 6 months. Both anterior and posterior lens radii also increased. The cornea also decreased in power, but it was only approximately 1/3 the amount of decrease in lens power. So these are the graphs which show correlation between the refractive error with lens, with cornea, and with axial length. So although significant reduction took place both in cornea and lens, they did not show any correlation with the change in refractive error. It was only the axial length which showed the change in refractive error and which was significantly correlated. So we know that the visual regulation of eye growth probably involves the achievement of the refractive state, which is best adapted for that particular eye. So it does not depend on any factor. It probably is the adaptation of the eye according to its original refractive error to make it near emmetropic. So we know that the visual acuity by most post-preferential looking test, this is the test which is more commonly clinically used. So you can see that the visual acuity, how it's increasing over the months. And probably around 18 to 24, that's around 2 years, it becomes nearly 20 by 20. This was a study which was done by ATA study, Amblyopia treatment study group. So they have shown that around 30 to 35 months, most of the child will have 6 by 20 vision or better. At around 36 to 47 months, they'll have 615 vision or better. At around 60 months, they'll have 612 or better. And around 72 months, they will still have 6 by 10. So probably by 72 months is the age where they probably attain the normal visual acuity. So the question is, should we prescribe all refractive errors? Should we? When, if at all we have to? How much are we supposed to prescribe? And how to assess? How to assess the refractive error in the child? That's the more important question. While the former two would be discussed in the subsequent talk, I'll be probably discussing how to assess the visual or refractive error in a child. So refracting a child is technically a challenging encounter. Unlike adults where prescription of glasses is very simple, you have to just give him best corrected visual acuity for which he accepts the glasses for which he has best corrected visual acuity. But unfortunately, a child cannot provide a reliable subjective refraction, especially in a busy clinic and with standard vision chart which we normally use, they are Snellen's chart or ETDRS chart. There are ways to assess a visual acuity in children, but then it's highly variable, and in a busy clinic it may not be very practical to assess the vision of each and every child with those charts. It becomes little easier when the child becomes verbal, but still it depends on the child's cooperation and his alertness. So objective retinoscopy is the only way out. We cannot do any subjective refraction, and it's only a serious responsibility of the examiner to do a proper refraction, which is must. And you have to always do a cycloplegic retinoscopy because a child can accommodate. So they can have a wide range of refractive retinoscopies if you do not refract them, if you do not do cycloplegic refraction. Refractive error, whether the refractive error is still present or this refractive error is going to retropize within time. It also needs the interpretation of child's visual acuity, whether this visual acuity is normal for that particular age or not. You have to assess that also. And then of course its visual need also, that the child particularly needs this kind of prescription or not. With this I would like to conclude my talk, and I will invite